Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second part of assaultive offenses. So for the first part, we talked about the common law assaultive offenses, battery and assault, and then the other offenses that go with that. And then we specifically looked at New York's assaultive offenses. So what we're going to do to finish up crimes against persons is we're going to talk about what we call the confinement offenses. And then at the end, we're just going to throw in a few additional offenses. So let me share my PowerPoint with you. Okay, so these are going to be the last batch of crimes against persons that we're going to talk about. So just to get us thinking about it, I want you to think of this. So J.Z. Lee Dugard was walking to the school bus stop within sight of her stepfather. The stepfather saw two people in a gray sedan make a U-turn at the bus stop and force her into a car. He ran after him as fast as he could, but he couldn't catch him. She was held captive for 18 years by Philip Garrido's backyard. So when you hear that, what crime comes to your mind? What types of crimes are you thinking of? Well, hopefully you said the confinement crimes, which fall into two categories, which would be false imprisonment or kidnapping. So these are the terms that are used under common law. So what are the distinctions between these two? Well, false imprisonment is confining someone against their will. So an example of this would be if the bell rang for school and I locked the door and I wouldn't let you leave, okay? So you were lawfully there. I didn't force you to go there. You were there, but I won't let you leave now. That's what falls under false imprisonment. Kidnapping's a little different. Kidnapping is unlawful taking and carrying away of a victim without their consent. So it requires that taking and carrying away. And we call that asportation, A-S-P-O-R-T-A-T-I-O-N, asportation. So in order to qualify as kidnapping, you have to have that additional requirement of asportation, which is that taking and carrying away. So if they're just there, it's false imprisonment, but if you're moving them in some way, it falls under kidnapping. So when you think about those distinctions, what about this? A police officer unlawfully arrests a man and takes him to prison. Well, that could be a kidnapping charge in the sense that you're taking them somewhere against their will. So this is unlawful arrest, right? A prison warden fails to release a prisoner who has been there and their term is served and they need to be released. That's false imprisonment. Craig helps a woman deliver her baby in the alley and then takes the baby to raise as his own. That's kidnapping because you're taking and carrying away. Okay. Oh, so this is saying it's a little different. They say it's false imprisonment. I'm sorry. I created this. I don't know why they're saying me. The reason why I put this in there is to remind myself. Now, there are some situations where the taking away is part of the initial crime. So in this case, it's not necessarily the crime of kidnapping in the sense that the sake of it isn't to take them away. It's just false imprisonment because you falsely arrest them. So that's how they're drawing the distinction with that. So there was a case that this is based off of, I'll just tell you that, where a woman was kidnapped and thrown in a car and driven down the road to like an alley and then raped. And what the court said is that's more false imprisonment because they were just moving them for the sake of committing an additional crime. It wasn't for the sake of actually holding them against their will, like the crime of kidnapping. This is really technical. I probably should just take this out. You don't have to worry about this that much, but that's one of the distinctions. Where the second one would be the false imprisonment, and then the third one is actually the kidnapping. So sorry about the confusion on the first one. Now, let's look at the New York laws. So in New York, we do have kidnapping, and then we have a crime that's called unlawful imprisonment. So kidnapping, you can look it up, and we have specific requirements for kidnapping in New York, and you'll see the distinction. And then unlawful imprisonment instead of false imprisonment. So that's what we call it in New York, unlawful imprisonment. So one of the things you need to understand for this distinction in New York is the distinction between what we call restrain and abduct. So one of the things is restrain is just kind of confining them against their will. So if you look up the definition section and you look up restraint, you'll see that it basically means that, confining them against their will. If you find restraint, then you're going to be more under the unlawful imprisonment section. Abduct, though, has more of that asportation requirement. So in New York, in order to move to kidnapping, it follows along the lines of common law. You have to meet the definition of abduct to move into the kidnapping sections. So you need to understand the distinction between these definitions, because if it's restrained, you're going to be in unlawful imprisonment. If you find abduct, then you're going to fall more under kidnapping. So I created a reference sheet for you. You can print this out online and use it as a reference when you're doing your assignments. But basically, this is how it breaks it down between these different crimes. So kidnapping, like I said, is abduct. Unlawful imprisonment is restrain. So kidnapping first is abduct another person, plus you need a subsection. So like we needed with murder first, you needed a subsection. You need a subsection for kidnapping first. So make sure you understand the subsections. One is you're kidnapping for ransom. So look through and see if you fit into one of those subsections. Where kidnapping second does not require the subsection. So you would default to kidnapping second if you have an abduct, but you don't meet the subsection. Unlawful imprisonment first is the restrain. So restraining a person and the risk of serious physical injury. So while you are restraining them and keeping them from moving, you are somehow subjecting them to the risk of serious physical injury. It doesn't mean they suffer serious physical injury. It just means they could have suffered a serious physical injury. Unlawful imprisonment second is just restrain another person. So if you can't prove the requirement of serious risk of serious physical injury, then you default to imprisonment second. Now, some of the issues dealing with the imprisonment sort of offenses, the first thing is Amber Alert. So some of you may have had on your phone this like loud alarm going off. And Amber Alert is a system that was created at the federal level, so that if people are abducted, that the police can put out a notification for, it's usually young children, and they've been kidnapped, and they can send out an immediate notification. Because we know if people are notified and they can be found in a prompt way, they have a better chance of surviving, basically. So we do have this Amber Alert basically to help us catch people for that. We also have, I don't know if you've ever seen, they also have what's called a silver alert. That's for older people that maybe have dementia or something like that that are missing. And so they have that also. Now, the interesting thing about kidnapping is it's always a state crime unless the person has been gone for more than 24 hours. Once a person has been gone for more than 24 hours, it is deemed a federal crime, because the thought is after 24 hours, the likelihood of the person being transported across the state line is pretty high. And once you cross state lines, that falls into federal territory. So anytime it's over 24 hours, the FBI now can be involved in trying to locate the people, because this assumption is that they cross state line and it can be a federal offense. Now, we mentioned this, or if you looked at the reference sheet for assaults, when we did the assaults, you'll see at the bottom, one of the assaults was luring a child. Sometimes you see this, and it often goes with these confinement offenses. So we do have a specific crime in New York called luring a child, and this involves doing some trickery or something to get the child to come, and then you kidnap them. Okay, so that can be an additional charge on top of the kidnapping charges. So what about this? David and Marley get divorced. They cannot agree on shared custody. Marley does not want Dave to have custody anymore. So one night she takes the children and leaves the country. She takes them to Mexico and raises them in that country. She does not tell anyone where she is going, and they cannot locate her or the children. If you are the prosecutor, what could you charge in New York? Well, first of all, across state and federal lines, so it would be a federal crime. But if you just said New York, what could you charge them in New York? Obviously, this would be an abduction, right? But what is one of the problems with this? Marley has legal custody of the children, and so does Dave. They both equally share custody. So she's not really taking them against the law. She has the ability to have custody. But we don't want one parent just taking children from the other when they both have custody. So it doesn't fall specifically into the definition of kidnapping. So New York has created a second crime, and it's called custodial interference. So since they both have legal authority to the children, it's not really kidnapping. So you would then fall under custodial interference because you're interfering with the custody of another parent. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about some random crimes against persons that I just want to mention. So we've finished the assaultive crimes. We've finished the confinement offenses. These are some additional offenses that I just want to mention so you have some understanding of them. So bullying. Bullying is on the media all the time. You see things with bullying all the time. And bullying is defined as the repeated and systematic harassment and attack perpetrated by individual or groups. So that is the basic definition that has been used to describe bullying, okay? Harassment and attacks. Now, this bullying can come in multiple forms. There can be actual physical violence where you're beating them up or assaulting them. Obviously, if it's physical violence, you can also charge them with assaultive types of offenses. But a lot of times it's verbal taunts, name calling, putting people down, threats, intimidation, extortion, stealing, lunch money, lunches, things like that, spreading rumors, and then a harassment through technology. So you can really harass people quite a bit with bullying. And I've also even seen bullying to the extent where it's caused people to commit suicide, or the bullying could even take the form of encouraging suicide. Now, the important thing to remember with bullying is it's not really a crime. If you can't fall into assault or harassment, some sort of aggravated harassment charge, there's not really a charge for it. But what they have done is they put it as a requirement on schools to try to stop. So you will see it's not in our penal law, but just so you have some understanding, New York education law requires that schools stop bullying when they see it occurring. So they have to have a plan, they have to keep track, and they are required to take action to stop bullying when they are aware that it is occurring. Now, this is not a criminal thing. This is a civil thing. So if your school district is not following this and doing what they're supposed to be doing, you could technically sue them. But so it's not really criminal, but I always like to point it out because it sort of skirts that line between criminal and civil. And then there's always the question, should schools be criminally responsible for not stopping bullying? And that's a whole nother issue you can think about. Now, another issue that falls under this, and we kind of did this under assault a little bit, is stalking. So stalking is willfully and maliciously and repeatedly making credible threats to a person. So just one time calling somebody or doing something is not going to be enough. It has to be willful, which is intentional. It has to have some evilness or maliciousness to it, and it has to be repetitive. So it has to kind of be repeated behavior, and it has to be some behavior that really causes the victim to feel threatened. In New York, we do have specific stalking sections. So if you felt like your crime falls under stalking, it would be one of these degrees, okay? There is a federal stalking statute. It falls under what we call the Violence Against Women's Act. It has to be re-upped every so often. Just recently, they did re-sign the Violence Against Women's Act, and it does create a specific federal crime of stalking, but the stalking has to cross some state or tribal line, okay? And then you have to intend to injure, kill, harass, or intimidate the victim. So it can be a federal offense if they're using computers or phones or anything like that that crosses state lines. You can actually charge them with a federal stalking crime. Cyber stalking is the same, except it's using the computer. So you're stalking people on social media, on social sites, on the computer, sending harassing emails. In New York, that falls under aggravated harassment. So we have a specific section for cyber stalking, which is aggravated harassment in New York. And there's 2 separate degrees. The last thing, I think this is the last thing I want to talk about, is hate crimes. So hate crimes are interesting. So the definition of a hate crime is an offense that is motivated by bias or hatred based on a person's race, religion, national origin, gender, disability, sexual orientation, nationality. Okay, so you commit a crime against the person because you hate them for one of these reasons. So that is the idea of a hate crime. Some states don't have hate crimes. New York does have a hate crime, but in New York, it's important to remember it's not its own distinct crime. What hate crimes is in New York is it's a crime enhancer. So if somebody kills somebody or robs them or vandalizes, and the reason why they committed that crime was based on one of these hate reasons, then you can seek an enhancement in the punishment. So you basically are going to prove that they committed the underlying offense. If you think it was motivated by hate, you can prove this hate crime enhancement, and then they're going to get a harsher sentence. So then you have to think, how do you prove hate crimes? So really think about this. If you're a prosecutor and you wanted to prove that somebody committed a hate crime, what would you have to show? Well, you have to show that they did it because of a hate. Well, how do you do that? What kind of evidence do we use? So you would probably look at their social media, what websites they follow, did they send emails or texts with these hatred keys to it? When they're committing the crime, are they using derogatory terms, calling names? When they did property crimes, did they use derogatory things on the walls? So you would have to point to additional factors that show that the crime was committed specifically because of a hate, because of one of these reasons. And then you can get that enhancement. Okay. So some critics don't like hate crimes. They say, you know what, you commit a crime, it's the same. Who cares if you did it because of hate? So if I kill somebody, who cares if I kill them because I hate them or because I just killed them? It's the same crime. You still took somebody's life. You don't really need an enhancement. You just charge them for what the crime is. Because when you have hate crimes, you're saying certain victims get more protection than other victims, right? So if you're a white male victim, you don't receive as much, you're not viewed as protected as a minority, a woman, sexual orientation. So that is one of the criticisms of it. Other people say, no way. Like, if you have that motivation based on the history of racism and things that have existed in this country, you should have that enhancement. So that's kind of a debate that's going on in the legal field. Should we have hate crimes? Georgia did not have a hate crime for a long time. And then after the Arbery case, I don't know if you followed that at all, where he was shot, they then have now passed hate crime. So it's kind of interesting. More and more states are adding hate crimes, but it is somewhat controversial if we should have them or not. Okay, so that's all I have. So just a learning check. If you want to check and see how well you know your distinctions, I have 6 problems here. So you can stop the video, see if you can identify which New York crime they would be. And then when you're all set, start the video and I'll flip to the next slide and you can compare your answers to mine and see if you're in the right ballpark. Okay, so stop the video, work on it, and then you can get started when you're done. Okay, so hopefully you're back. I'll show you my answers. So these are what I chose. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, like if you're in the right field. Remember, different prosecutors can choose different offenses. This is just what I chose for each of these. So just see if you're like in the right ballpark. So you can now complete your case study. Your case study for this week has 2 parts. You have to identify an assaultive offense from the last lecture, and then you need to identify a confinement offense from this lecture. So you should have 2 crimes. And then the last thing is you should be getting ready to take exam 5. Oh, actually, I think it's exam 3 for you. Sorry, I should fix this. This is from before. It's exam 3 because I combined a bunch of exams this year. So exam 3, but it still is all the crimes against persons. So homicide, sex offenses, assaultive offenses, confinement offenses, and then these few extra ones that I added at the end. Okay, so make sure it will open on Thursday and you'll have a week to take it. And if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, so that's all I have for the second lecture. Good luck and reach out if you have any questions. I will see you soon.